Hey there YouTube, it's John coming at you with my second video. For the second video, I thought it would be nice to do kind of this obligatory must-have accessories. Although I'm going to split this video into kind of two groups of accessories, things that I think are actually must-have, and then a second group of accessories that I found really helpful for me in my own personal foray into film and film photography. These items are in no particular order, and of course you're going to see some things that I tried to present some unique items that I haven't seen in other videos on YouTube, but of course there's going to be some overlap. Maybe consider areas where there's overlap between what I'm talking about and some other videos are talking about is definitely must-have items. But let's get started here. What should I start out with? Let's start out with this. Let's talk about tripods. Get this focus dialed in. You gotta have a tripod. Oh, you just must have a tripod. I shoot a lot of photography in low light, landscape photography. You know, if you're shooting portraits of your friends, there are so many scenarios where you really want a tripod. There's a lot of different tripods out there, and one thing that I really want to emphasize in this video is that you don't have to spend a lot of money. You know, here, let me grab this. Be right back. Okay. For the longest time, this was my tripod. I bought this at Goodwill, you know, for probably $9, $10. It's totally functional. It has a nice sturdy head. You know, this is you would call this like a pan tilt style head. As far as the sockets are concerned, for the most part, tripod sockets are universal. There are some oddball cameras out there. There's some old Soviet Union cameras and other stuff that used a different tripod socket. But for the most part, you're not going to run into an issue with that. But this was my old tripod, and you know, it was it served, it was dialed in, it served all the purposes that I needed to. You know, it had extendable legs. This very top part would move up and down. You know, this was a wonderful tripod, but it's a little flimsy. You know, it's not the nicest tripod out there, but being the hardcore thrift shopper that I am, I found this tripod also at the same Goodwill, but months later for $10. What's the brand here? The brand is Rocket Fish. I don't know anything about them, but I don't need to look up the company because I can just tell by the build of this tripod. You know, when you pull the legs out, they don't slap back down. They kind of like have a nice resistance to them. I really love these ball tri-top heads. You know, and you just kind of get a feel for really good buildable quality when there's a nice amount of resistance but not too much. Making your adjustments, that's a sign of something that's built really well. And man, tripods are just indispensable. You know, if you're shooting in low light, they're just wonderful to have. Taking portraits, taking long exposure landscapes. You gotta have a tripod. Gotta have a tripod. Go to a thrift store and find one. You don't need to buy a really nice one. Cheap ones will, all they have to do is hold your camera steady. You know, the cheaper ones are a little bit lighter, a little bit flimsier. You got to be a little bit more careful with them, but it's not a big deal. They still get the job done, and you shouldn't be afraid of that. Almost everything on this list can be had very cheaply. There's a couple things that are a little more expensive, but let's move on. This is a fun one. These are great. Oh wait, no, we're going essential items. I wouldn't put that in the essential list. Yeah. Also, and this pairs very, very well with a tripod, but you have a, let's get this, wrong direction. One day I'll get an autofocus lens, I promise. This is a cable release. I'll show you right here. So you have the shutter release button, and what you do is you thread this into the shutter release button, and you just press it down and it releases. You can see when you press this down, you get that little metal piece that comes out, and that actuates the shutter mechanism. A nice feature about this one that I have is, one, it's not super long. You know, the super long ones are kind of annoying. I really like these short cable releases, but it also has this threaded piece right here, so you can activate it and then tighten that thread, and this stays stuck out. So this is what you would use on like the bulb setting of your camera for a long exposure. You'd press this in, tighten that up, and from the moment you press it in, you would start your timer for however long you would want to keep your shutter open for a long exposure. You know, 5 seconds, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then you would just unscrew it, and it would release it and knock the shutter back down. You definitely want to have a cable release for really long exposure photography, because just the act of pressing the shutter button on your camera will impart very slight amounts of movement on your camera, but it will make your image a little bit blurry. And you know, with landscape photography, people really like to see pretty, you know, sharp images, generally speaking. Not that lo-fi images aren't beautiful in their own right, but shutter release goes really well with a tripod. You find them used on eBay. They're super cheap. I like the shorter ones, and it's nice if you can get, you know, this little threaded piece so you can keep it closed. That way you're not like sitting next to the camera, you know, with your finger on it holding it open. But these, definitely essential. You should get one. Okay, next item. These next couple of items kind of revolve around keeping your camera, specifically your lens, clean. One, these rocket blowers. These things are so nice. They just blow air, and the way they're designed, you know, you don't get any, they're only going to shoot out clean air. You're never going to blow dust onto something. Dust is the enemy. You use these on your negatives, you use these on your lenses. Put it right there. This is always kind of my first line of defense. Like, I don't really clean my lenses pretty much ever unless I accidentally unless I accidentally touch them, and then I get like a little oil smudge on the lens, then I'll actually have to clean it. But for just dust on your lens, get a rocket blower. These things are awesome. Every time, or every now and then when you're changing your lenses out, blow that mirror box out, you know, and you want to do that kind of with the camera upside down and blowing in. That way the dust that you're kind of agitating and moving around is actually falling out of the camera. But rocket blower, you know, you can probably pick they make larger ones. You know, I'm kind of a cheapo, so I bought this small one, but I find that it works perfectly. You know, probably find this for, I don't know, 20 bucks. I actually got my rocket blower in the same package as this next item. Very similar. The brand is, oh, wrong direction. The brand is Giotto, but this thing is awesome. It is a brush pen. So you press this little lever here and it puts out these super fine, soft hairs. And this pretty much does the same thing as the blower does. It's a little bit less versatile than the blower. I don't like to put this in the mirror box because it can knock you know, some of the like the foam mirror bumper pad. I've like agitated that and broken that up before with this. But on the lenses, this thing is great, you know. And it gets a little bit more dust off than the other one. Mostly these things are pretty interchangeable. You know, usually I have one in one bag and another in a different bag. But you know, make sure that you're not like really touching these bristles with your fingers. You know, your fingers have oils on them, and when you get the oils on these bristles, you can transfer that to your lens. You know, so try and keep that relatively clean. But this little Giotto pen, man, these things are awesome. I love this. I've had it forever. More essential items. I guess we'll just keep going with cleaning accessories, but I highly recommend these Tiffin tissue paper. You can also use like microfiber cloths. The only thing about those is you really don't want to, you're just going to get the most clean application when you use single-use items. Normally I'm all about reusing, all about recycling, but like I was saying with the oil on your fingers before, if you are using a microfiber cloth and you accidentally use it to like clean your glasses or clean anything other than your camera lenses, you can transfer oils onto your camera lens. If you don't like clean it all the time, I don't even know how you clean a microfiber cloth. I guess you can just throw it in the wash, I'm not sure. But you gotta clean it all the time to make sure you're getting dirt and like little micromolecules of sand, and my experience has been to avoid those and use these single-use lens tissue papers. So you get this little book, it has a ton of these really fine tissue papers, and I kind of like crumble them up into like a loose ball, and a lot of times I'll just use my breath, like hot warm breath on a lens, and just wipe it off. Sometimes it takes two, but these things are great, and they're guaranteed to not scratch your lens as long as you're not reusing them. Yeah, Tiffin lens cleaning papers. You can buy these on like, you know, they sell them on Amazon, although you shouldn't really buy things from Amazon. It's kind of an evil company. But you can get them on like B&H or Adorama. Lens tissue papers, definitely a must-have. You know, I recently gave my brother a film camera, and we were like looking through some of his images from a trip, and they were just all kind of soft, kind of not. There was a lot of room for improvement. And I looked at his lens, and you know, he had a UV filter on his lens, which was good, but the filter itself was filthy. I was like, oh, that's why all your images look kind of dirty. Okay. And what do I have here? You know, this probably isn't essential, but you know, like a lens cleaning solution. Like I said, a lot of times I just use my breath, but you know, this is probably better. You know, I imagine it's just like a dilute alcohol in like DI water or something. Okay, let's. I'm gonna say the rest of these items are not essential, but items that I've found to be super helpful. Actually, one more essential item, and then we'll move on to the non-essentials. You gotta have a camera bag. If you are just like throwing your camera in a non-padded camera bag, you're guaranteed to break it at some point. You should just get a camera bag. You know, if you need a bag to carry some other items in. You know, I just have this like very generic black camera bag. It's got just the right amount of pockets. You know, they usually have these dividers that you can move around and kind of customize the sizing of the spaces inside the bag. And I actually took, you know, these old cameras all come with like these great hilarious vintage straps, and I just adapted one of these to the shoulder bag. So I have a nice strap for my shoulder bag. But you should have one of those. Okay, on to the non-essential items. Let's start with like negatives. If you're shooting film, very quickly you are going to amass a large amount of negatives, and you should organize those negatives. You should organize those negatives in a book. You just buy these sleeves. You know, I have some for 35, some for 120, and you can organize them by date, and you are going to thank yourself later when you're like, oh, I really want to print that image from August of 2015. I wonder where that is. Let me search through hundreds and thousands of negatives. You know, start organizing them now. If you're just getting into film, you will be so happy if you just start off being organized with your negatives. I just recently was like, I need to organize my negatives. I'm so glad I did, especially since I've started printing a lot more. You know, because this is why film is so wonderful, is because you get this like real physical thing. You know, it's not a digital file that can be corrupted or lost. You're producing real things. You know, it's wonderful. Okay, yeah, that's the last of, I think, what I have as essential items. Let's move into some of the non-essentials. And here I have in this little bag, is this bag the item? No, but little bags are really nice to have. It's what's in the bag. I have a loop. Loops are wonderful, so you can look at the details in your negative. I don't have a scanner at home. I do scan all of my images, but I have to go to a university to do that. You know, scanning images can cost money if you don't have access to, you know, a free photo lab. So a lot of my images, I just have the negative, and then if I want to print them, I print them, and that's how I see them, you know, kind of in their intentional final form. But when you're picking which negatives you want to print, having a loop is really nice. This is just, it's a magnifying glass. It allows you to see the details in your negative, so you can pick the best negative to print. Usually that's done with like a light box that you would lay your negatives on top of. I don't have a light box. I'll just hold them up to the window or some other light source. It works just perfectly fine. I found this loop at a estate sale for like $9. It's really nice. Seems to be built well. It says it's coated ×12 loop. But yeah, loops you should get. You can buy those really cheaply as well, new or used online. Okay, next. I just got this beer the other day. It's hilarious. Henry Weinhardt's Private Reserve Northwest Style Lager. It's really cheap. It's actually not bad, especially on this hot day. Okay. Next item that I found to be super helpful in a lot of my film photography is contained in this little brown container. And this is a very specific type of this item. I'm speaking more generally and just using this specific example. But what I'm talking about here is called a close-up lens. This particular close-up lens actually has two pieces, and that's because it's for a TLR camera. But all the idea behind close-up lenses is the same for all of them. And what they do is they effectively reduce the minimum focusing distance of your lens. So on my TLR camera, it has a really big minimum focusing distance. It's like, it's over a meter. It's pretty long. But you know, let's say I want to take some floral pictures or some close-up of some different plant structures. It's really hard to do when you have to stand a meter away from your subject. So what these close-up lenses do is they allow you to focus much more closely. Now there is a trade-off with that. Oftentimes you do sacrifice image quality. Image quality always falls off more strongly on the edges, and then you know, usually the middle is more or less still better. The other trade-off with close-up lenses is you usually lose infinity focus. So you know, you kind of like throw them on your camera for very specific purposes, and then you take them off. Oftentimes close-up lenses are marked like +1, +2, +3. You know, +3s being like the closest you can get, and you know, those are gonna have the most distortion, whereas a +1 is only gonna improve your minimum focusing distance a little bit, but it's gonna keep some more of that image quality intact. But you know, I'm a total plant nerd. I love plants, I love insects. You know, I'm shooting outside all the time, and being able to get close up to my subjects is oftentimes pretty important for me. And a close-up lens allows me to do that. These things are super cheap. You just buy them the same, you know, this one is funny because it's on a TLR, you know, so you don't screw it on. It's a bay mount close-up filter. But, you know, buying it, you know, let's say you have a Nikon lens with a 52 millimeter threading for your filters. You just would look up 52 millimeter close-up filters and you find them for pretty much nothing. Really handy to have. Moving along, just filters in general. Filters are amazing, and they allow you to do so many creative things with your photography. The filters that I use the most often, I have this filter, which is a infrared filter. This only lets light at the wavelength of 722 nanometers and below through it. So it's pitch dark, it's perfectly black. I can barely see through this thing. You know, I can look through this and look up at the sun, and I just see kind of a faint red dot. But this is what you have to have for infrared photography. And I love infrared photography, so I have this filter right here for that. I'll do a video in the future on infrared film photography and show you some of the stuff I've produced with that. Other lenses, and I kind of went through this in my F1 video, but I'll just briefly mention them here. You know, a polarizing filter. This reduces glare and reflections. It's great for making clouds pop in the sky. Really good to have a polarizing filter. And then, you know, your like classic black and white filters like yellow, red, orange. You know, you can get like these graded filters for, you know, this is mostly, you're going to use this in like landscape, you know, when you have like a sky and kind of the rest of your image. But filters. Getting into film photography, you don't need filters, but as you progress, they're just going to give you more options and ultimately give you more control over the image that you're going to produce, and allow you to express your creativity, you know. Okay, on to the next item. Next in your camera kit, you should have a notebook. Especially when you're first getting into film photography, and you're making, let's say you're experimenting with different exposure, shutter speed, aperture combinations, different films, different lenses, different filters, whatever you're experimenting with, you're not going to remember all of that once you get your developed film back. You need to make notes. once you start, you know, and especially if you're developing your own film, you're printing your own film, you got to keep notes on different like times and temperatures that you're experimenting with. Being a studious note taker is a really good skill to have, and you should always have a notebook in your camera kit. Take good notes. It's good practice. If you're a student, you need to be taking good notes anyway, and it's a great habit to get into in the world of film photography. So get a notebook, take notes. Mine is it's a Write in the Rain book because I live in the Pacific Northwest and it's always raining. Okay, moving on. More accessories that aren't totally necessary, but I've found to be very helpful. This is there we go, screwdriver kit with a little pair of tweezers as well. Oftentimes I engage on very minor repairs of cameras and lenses, and to do that you have to have kind of this minimum threshold of tools, and that involves these specialty micro screwdrivers. And I'll link in the show notes the address to where I bought these, but it's great to tinker with old cameras, and you want to make sure that you have what's called JIS cross-point screwdrivers. These are actually different than Phillips screwdrivers. If you try, even if it's a tiny Phillips screwdriver, if you try and work on like pretty much any vintage film cameras with a Phillips screwdriver, you're going to mar the screw head and rip it out and ruin it. You know, I sold a Minolta SRT 101 that had a really dirty viewfinder and just crap around the prism and on top of the focusing screen, and it was very easy to take the top plate off and clean that camera out, and I'm so glad I did. It looked so much better when I was done with it, and I wouldn't have been able to do that without these tools. You know, I probably spent $20 on this little kit, but they're great, and you gotta have these JIS cross-point screwdrivers if you're gonna work on old film cameras. So we have that. We went over filters. All right, we're nearing the end, guys. Just 1, 2, 3 items left. I lied to you, just 2 items left. Let's, what could be in this box? This is a teleconverter. These things are great. What a teleconverter does is it goes between your camera body and your lens. So this would come off. I would put wrong way. That would go there, and then the lens would go on there. It goes on like that. What the teleconverter does is it doubles the focal length of your lens. So when I put a teleconverter on this 50mm lens, I all of a sudden have a 100mm lens. You can buy a teleconverter for pretty much nothing. You know, they have these, they're not extension tubes. They have like glass elements on the inside of them. Usually, oftentimes they're multi-coated with just a male and female piece for the mount. So you would buy these specific to the mount. This is an FD teleconverter. Oftentimes they make them, you know, like a ×2 teleconverter or times 1.4 teleconverter, and you just take that factor times the focal length of your lens, and that's what the new focal length is when you adapt these two. So this is a ×2, put it on my 50mm, I have a 100mm lens. Now the downside to these is that they also double your minimum aperture. So my 100mm or my 50mm 1.4 lens becomes a 100mm 2.8 lens. Now buying this is a lot cheaper than buying a 100mm f2.8 prime lens. And 100mm is kind of that magic focal length for portraits, which is often what I use this for. Now you will see a slight drop in image quality, but these things are so cheap, I would, so you would buy a teleconverter according to the mount, so it matches the mount of your lens and camera. And it's just a really cheap way to kind of expand the focal lengths that you're working with. You do have to be aware of the fact that it doubles the aperture. This renders it, for the most part, unuseful for zoom lenses. Zoom lenses already have pretty slow minimum apertures, so if you throw this on like an f4 zoom lens, all of a sudden the fastest that lens is going to be is at an f8, which isn't very fast at all. So not really good with zoom lens, but with fast primes, a teleconverter is a great way to instantly expand the focal lengths that you're working with, and I use a teleconverter a lot. And these can be had for almost nothing in great condition. I think that's all I'll say about these. You will have a slight decrease in image quality, but in my opinion it's pretty minimal. Softer on the edges, but center of your image should do just fine. Okay, that's it. That's not it. That's it until this last item. This last item. I love this thing. This is Gaussen brand. And this tiny little zipper. This is the most expensive item that I have as far as accessories go. Is a light meter. Light meters are so nice. A lot of people just shoot Sunny 16. I think that's great. Here in the Pacific Northwest, we deal with all sorts of really dark shadows out in the forest and overcast days, and it's never freaking sunny. And I personally find a light meter to be very helpful. And a light meter doesn't have to be inconvenient. You can buy a tiny light meter, just like this Digi6, this electronic light meter. It has both types of light meter readings. This is incident, this is reflective. If your camera has a light meter, I have several cameras that don't, which is why I have this, but if your camera does have a light meter, it's using reflective light metering system. And this is nice because you can get that incident light, which is really great for doing portraiture. If you want to get the exact meter reading, in the shadow on someone's face, this incident reader is really good for that. This guy probably costs a little over $100, but you basically just set it to your ISO. I have it set to 400, take a reading, it gives you a EV value, so then you move the dial to the EV, and if I were to take a picture in here with 600 or 400 film at f1.4, it would have to be a 60th of a second. It's doable. I can take a picture in this light. But this thing is great, and I found it to be super helpful. Sunny 16 is great, but having a light meter is also nice. A note on light meters, you can get really cheap to really expensive ones. Be aware of the old electronic ones. All use mercury meter or mercury batteries, so the voltage and the light reading is going to be a little bit off. For the most part, avoid those old the meters without batteries, the selenium meters, unless that selenium meter has been stored in perfect darkness its whole life. because they don't turn off. The selenium just slowly wears out over time. And a lot of those don't really work anymore. Some of them do, but for the most part, you want to avoid those. Whew. That's it. Hopefully you've learned some new things. You've had some ideas for some stuff you could bring into your film kit. Some items, you know, might be useful for some more advanced users, but hopefully if you're just getting into film photography and you're thinking about what do I need, this video was helpful on the accessories front. There's a lot out there. This doesn't have to be expensive or difficult. You can do it, and I think with that we'll sign off. So cheers.